In January 1947, I was employed by Ballantynes, but I was very fortunate to get an apprenticeship with Ballantynes in the Stinkin room. My name then was Barbara Caldwell. I served my apprenticeship, learning everything that the Stinkin demanded of us, which was an extensive apprenticeship, and she was a very fair but heartless firm boss. In our work, all the girls were known by their Christian names, mainly. I was only the two girls being in the workroom with the name Barbara. I was referred to always as Margaret, and while in the Stinkin room and while under the employer of Ballantynes, I was known as Margaret. On the day of the fire, we had been allowed in the afternoon to have an extended afternoon tea time because of a birthday celebration. We went down at our usual time, and on the way down we smelt smoke, thinking it came from a crew who were working down on the floor between two buildings. We came back from afternoon tea later, and on the way back, or during the course of the afternoon tea, I met one of the girls from the credit office with whom I was friends with, Jessie Smith. I had a brief time with her, went back to our workroom. Normally I passed her on the stairs and just said good afternoon or hello and on our way. But this day we were talking for quite a few minutes. I was to be the last person to see Jessie alive, or speak to her. After we got back, Miss Jenkins had been summoned to a meeting with Mr. Roger, Mr. Ronald and Mr. Kenneth Ballantyne prior to her taking over Miss Hardy's workroom with Miss Hardy's impending marriage. Miss Doris Stewart was going to be our boss. She was currently our forewoman. Miss Ethel Dale was also another forewoman. And this particular meeting was called to a halt when they were summoned downstairs with the fire alarm. Miss Jenkins was told to return to her workroom, but Miss Jenkins didn't. Miss Jenkins followed them down to have a look and see what the situation was. She didn't like what she saw, so she came back and gave us the alarm. As she approached the door to us, she just said to Betty, she was on the machinist, she just said to turn the machines off and get her things, preparation for getting out. She told me to turn the irons off. She said, now all of you, get your things and get out. She did not tell us or shout to us that there was a fire in the building. She told the first 3 or 4 at the door. We got part of the way out and realised that Doris Good was not with us. Somebody said she had gone to the toilet. So we doubled back, warned Doris. We went round to where we normally went down, or where it was there where we came up in the morning and went down again at night, and we found that our way was blocked with smoke. We then doubled back and were led down by one of the other girls into a different area again. This part of it was a wee bit hazy in my recollection, but we finally came out to the main stairway. And we went down there and then through on the bottom floor and out onto the Colombo Street entrance. But one fire engine was there, and I had a smock on at the time. I can remember taking the smock off and putting a coat on. From there, one of the girls felt faint. We got her into a shop quite handy, and I proceeded to go to the DIC to let a friend know who worked there. My mother worked in the Social Security office at the time, and I didn't know whether she would have known about the fire, so I thought the best thing for me to do was to go straight home. I got on a bus, the Warranee bus, because the Rickerton trams were not working. When I got on the bus, the lady in front of me said, "It's on a toilet stool in the workroom, put an iron on." I wasn't overly amused, and I told her so. So I finally got home. I don't remember actually crossing the square. It was probably stopped at the time. And I got to the bus, I don't remember getting off. I remember getting off the bus, but I don't remember walking home. I suppose the game was shot, and I was greeted by the family at home, of course. In the evening, it was most apparent when we were called to the roll call. The workroom girls were in all together. On one side of us was the gap left for the credit office. On the other side of us was the gap left for the millinery workroom. Both those areas were very much vacant. It was then that it really hit us that there had been a loss of life, although we did know. Miss Denton had asked for this meeting with the principals of the company to be brought forward earlier than anticipated, because she was to pick up her brand new car, which in those days, directly after all, was quite something. And she was to pick this car up, and I think it was 4:30 or 4:45. And of course, I still don't know whether she picked her car up that day, but if she hadn't, number one, disobeyed her principles about going back to her workroom, and number two, that car was, just about to be picked up, I could foresee that we would be very much another set of victims in that room. At the earlier seminar, it became very apparent to me that the situation that we would have been in, had we not had that leeway of her and her forethought in getting us out.
It's 50 years since 41 people died in a blaze which destroyed Ballantynes department store. David DeSoma looks at commemorations of a tragedy that's an unforgettable part of Christchurch history.
For Lois jury, there's no bitterness or finger-pointing, just a deep sorrow about the 41 people who perished this day in 1947, and a great sense of gratitude that she was spared.
I consider myself very lucky to have lived my life and had a good marriage and lovely children, lovely grandchildren.
She jumped from the second story to escape the country's worst ever fire.
We could hear the screams, unfortunately, and the screams just stopped instantly, and we knew they were dead.
The tragedy sent a nation into mourning. A Royal Commission of Inquiry blamed Ballantynes for not having adequate fire evacuation procedures or alarms, and it concluded the fire service lacked the resources and leadership to combat such a blaze.
I tend to think that Ballantynes management made very bad decisions, or in many ways just failed to make decisions, which led to the deaths.
But Lois Jury doesn't blame anyone. She says it was fate.
What other explanation could you give for all those lovely, lovely young girls and fine people that died in the middle of an afternoon, you know? You couldn't. You have to look at it like that.
Massive changes to fire prevention and firefighting followed the Ballantynes blaze. Now alarms, sprinklers and smoke detectors are essential. And this evening, hundreds took part in a memorial service, proving the fire that ripped through the building 50 years ago is still fresh in the hearts and minds of many. David DeSoma, One Network News.
Kia ora, good evening, I'm Neil Wacker. Welcome to this special edition of Inside New Zealand. November 18, 1947, exactly 50 years ago today, at about this time in the evening, firemen in Christchurch were still dampening down the burnt-out shell of Ballantynes department store. Meanwhile, in nearby King Edward Barracks, the staff were assembled, a roll call taken, and about now the enormous gravity of the disaster was being realized. Tonight, for the first time, we bring you the story of the greatest fire disaster in New Zealand's history. All archive footage you're about to see was actually shot as events unfolded on the day.
I ran, and I ran several blocks, and as I got nearer, I could smell and see all the smoke.
There were several of the staff women, I think they were wearing probably a green smock, and they were leaning out of one of these windows upstairs, and they were actually waving to the people down below in the street, when suddenly there was this almighty whoosh, and they disappeared backwards, this holocaust of smoke and flame.
Many people witnessed the fire and saw a fire of huge proportions with people screaming and firemen running in all directions. But the critical part of the whole thing was in the initial stages of the fire, when it was forming itself, when it was spreading like an insidious cancer throughout the whole complex.
I don't think I can ever explain the horror, ever.
50 years on, the Ballantynes fire remains the worst disaster of its type in New Zealand's history. This one event sent headlines around the world, overshadowing even the wedding of the young Princess Elizabeth days later. Laws were broken, leadership was inept, and judgment calls at the scene were found to be wanting. Yet, no one was prosecuted, and one question was never asked. Were the deaths of 41 people avoidable? On the 27th of January 1948, the Commission of Inquiry met here in the provincial chambers to begin their investigation. They put under close scrutiny the firm of Ballantynes, the fire brigade, and the city council. It remains incredible that as a result of a cellar fire in the extreme corner of a large city store, and with more than 25 minutes warning of the danger before the first flames were seen, 41 people were burnt alive. In this program, we intend to take you back through the events of that day by talking to survivors and witnesses. We'll examine the proceedings of the Commission of Inquiry and present footage never seen before. In the spring of 1947, Christchurch was buoyantly anticipating its 100th anniversary.
It was a very elegant era. In those days, when you went shopping, you never carried your parcels. They were always sent, either delivered to your home or your hotel, or if you were in from the country, as we were, they were delivered to your garage, where the car was garaged.
Well, Christchurch, to me, in the 1940s, was still virtually a replica of an English town.
Ballantynes has always been considered the Harrods of New Zealand. Ballantynes, for instance, had a commissionaire in a lovely powder blue uniform with silver buttons, and he always held open the heavy swing doors for you, and he would greet you with good morning and eventually, of course, your name, because he got to know everyone that shopped at Ballantynes.
The other types of shops that were similar tried to create the similar sort of atmosphere that Ballantynes had, beef, DIC, farmers, but somehow they could never quite get that attitude that Ballantynes, there was an atmosphere in Ballantynes that one could not copy. It's intangible, you can't describe it, but it was there.
While nearly 1,000 people went about their business in the store above, Smith, an employee in the cellar, slips away unnoticed, leaving the cellar fatally unattended. From records of the Court of Inquiry, Ballantynes staff are called to the witness stand.
My name is Keith Smith, and I was a storeman for Ballantynes at the time of the fire. At about 3:25, I left the basement for afternoon tea. There was no smell of fire.
Occupying more than an acre in the middle of Christchurch's central business district, Ballantynes was the largest and most exclusive department store and family drapery business in the South Island. Behind this facade of luxury, comfort, and pampered elegance, laws were being broken. A labyrinth of rooms, corridors, stairs, and alleyways created, without permits, concealed a death trap. In the building at the time of the fire were approximately 500 customers and 480 staff. In all, about 1,000 people.
Standing in Colombo Street, looking across the road, the most southerly building is Congreve's, and next to it we have Goodman's building, and on the corner we have Pratt's building. In 1947, the Ballantynes complex was made up of 7 buildings, and they had been built from 1885 through to 1906. Some of them had been built by Ballantynes, and others had been built by other owners, and Ballantynes had later purchased them as part of their retail operation. And initially, those buildings were blocks in their own right, particularly the ones that had been built by other people. And at various stages, there'd been openings made in those walls. So, in terms of fire protection, that complex became very vulnerable. Those openings in the main were unprotected. In other words, when a fire got to them, it could just keep going. The stairways never had any protection around them. They were just open. A fire could lead up and spread straight into the floor. There was no smoke-stock lobbies or smoke doors around the stairs. Fire and smoke was able to get into the lift shaft. And the basements are also linked. The 3 buildings that front Colombo Street, which are the buildings that are most important to understanding the Ballantynes tragedy, namely Congreve's, Goodman's and Pratt, each had basements, and 2 of those had been linked as well in this operation of making holes in walls. And ironically enough, they're in the process of actually, builders are on the site the day of the fire actually linking the 3rd basement. They're actually cutting the holes into the 3rd basement on the day the fire occurred.
Barely 5 minutes after the storeman leaves, with staff and customers on the floors above, the cellar begins to smoulder. In just 30 minutes, Ballantynes buildings will be engulfed in flames. 5 minutes after the storeman leaves, staff notice the first signs of trouble.
I am Percy Stringer, an employee of Ballantynes. At 3:31, I noticed smoke coming from the cellar and drew this to the attention of Mr. Faulkner. We visited the cellar and found hot smoke by the south wall, but no flame could be seen nor sound of fire heard. We retreated and asked if the fire service had been notified.
Ballantynes was managed by the 3 brothers, Mr. Ronald, Mr. Roger, and Mr. Kenneth. As managing director, assistant managing director, and general manager, they controlled a respectful, obedient, loyal, and industrious staff of approximately 300 female and 135 male employees.
At the time of the fire, I was the office junior at Booth McDonald's, and Dad worked for Ballantynes. He'd only been there 7 weeks. 5 of those weeks he'd worked in an office that fronted onto Litchfield Street, and the last 2 to 3 weeks he had been in the credit office.
Located on the 3rd floor, the credit office was the hub of the administrative empire. It was in this office that 19 people were to die.
When I first went there, it was a very small little office on the 2nd floor, but they were building the big offices upstairs on the 3rd floor, and shortly after I'd gone there, that's where we all went. And there were as many as 26 women there at one time, I think, yes. And it was very busy. And, oh yes, we're all more or less the same age, and they're all very friendly, and, you know, you all had your special friends.
Our day started on the tick at 8 o'clock, and there we machined furiously. It was a place to work, and that's what we did. Although the girls, we were very sociable.
Within minutes of smoke being discovered, and the fire brigade still not called, senior management are on the scene to investigate. Staff wait for the evacuation order.
I am, Your Honour, Mr. Roger Ballantyne. At approximately 3:33 p.m, I investigated the cellar and met Mr. Stringer, who advised us the conditions below. I asked if the fire service had been advised and was told that they had been.
By this time there's quite a crowd forming, you know, watching the smoke, and people from Ballantynes were also looking out of the windows, and that's, I spotted my father among them, and whistled out to him, but couldn't get his attention.
9 minutes after the discovery of the smouldering cellar, staff on the top floor were being affected by smoke. Still no call to the fire brigade is made and no general alarm issued.
Mrs. Crew, Your Honour, in charge of the millinery department's top floor. I encountered smoke at 3:40.
This was a hierarchical business, where personal initiative was suppressed and obedience went without question. In such an environment, the need for decisive leadership was critical.
Your Honour, Kenneth Ballantyne. I was at the inquiry desk at the ground floor. I learnt that the telephone operator, Miss Hamilton, was possibly in peril. I went up the main staircase to find out where she was. On the way up, I met Mrs. Crew. I heard the call to the brigade being put through. I went to the credit and accountancy offices, opened the door from the credit room leading to the fire escape and saw the smoke and heat in the alleyway, down which the fire escape ran.
Finally, more than 10 minutes after the first discovery of smoke, the fire brigade is called.
Christchurch Fire Board, incident book, November 18, 1947. Received call per exchange phone to Ballantynes cellar. Turned out number 11, 1 and 3 motors. Electric ladder. Notified traffic, police, MED, gas and waterworks.
Kenneth Ballantyne must have been aware of the gravity of the situation. He knew the call had already been delayed by some 10 minutes. Yet, knowing that none of his staff would leave their post without it, he issued no instruction to evacuate the building.
Only 2 minutes after the alarm is raised, the fire brigade arrives at the scene.
Fire Officer Burrows. I arrived at the Colombo Street frontage at 3:48 and observed smoke emanating from the alleyway at the south end of Colombo Street entrance.
And I talked to Jim Burrows in his retirement years, fireman to fireman, about the fire, and in his evidence as well. He always felt that the fire was confined when he got here. He felt he was dealing with a basement fire. He was unaware that people had tried to deal with this fire for at least 10 minutes on most conservative estimates before the fire brigade had been even called. Even when the fire brigade arrived there, unbeknownst to him, the upper floors of Goodman's buildings would have been filling with smoke. And unbeknownst to the girls that were waving to the fire engines and the firemen downstairs from the upper floor windows, their escape was already being cut off by smoke building up in the lift shaft and the stairs of that building.
While all of this was going on above, life on the shop floor was proceeding as normal.
I've always shopped for my Cyclex face lotion. It's the Cyclex counter. And in fact, I was at the Cyclex counter talking to Molly Sinclair when the fire started. She said to me, "Have I got time to go and get my handbag?" And I said, "Oh, I doubt if you should." But at that moment, somebody said, "Everyone out." And she said, "I think you'd better go." So I went across the beach, where I stood flabbergasted and watched the fire.
The people were shouting out in Beefs as the fire at Ballantynes. Well, the would-be customers, of course, they disappeared, and the working staff, particularly on the ground floor of Beefs, all made a beeline for the large windows facing Colombo Street. Well, the crowds were tremendous, the crowds of people that arrived, and when the fire engines arrived, they had a terrible time trying to get the engines relatively close to the mains, and the hoses were just a tangle of hoses all up and down virtually that area outside in Cashel Street it was.
Unaware the fire has been smouldering for over 10 minutes, firemen attempt to enter the smoking cellar, while staff on the floors above exchange light-hearted banter with the gathering crowds below.
Oh, crikey, Dick. We weren't there very long, and up on the third floor, a lot of girls waving out the window, waving to the people in Beefs.
I think they were wearing probably, a green smock. And they were leaning out of one of these windows upstairs, and they were actually waving to the people down below in the streets. When suddenly there was this almighty whoosh, and they disappeared backwards, this holocaust of smoke and flame.
At 3:59, some 10 minutes after the arrival of the fire brigade, 30 minutes after the discovery of smoke in the cellar, fire erupts through the first floor. Some staff on the third floor are not yet aware of their predicament. Already, 7 people have died.
Well, I picked up my clipboard, made my way down the passage to get into the lift, waited for the lift, then went down with the lift operator. And that was the conversation, that there was a fire immediately below us in the basement.
I could smell something. So I got up and looked out the window, and the smoke that was really coming around, it was beasts in those days, and it's after Barnett's now. And the smoke, it must have been really healing, you know, because it was like great big clouds.
Halfway down, I would say the electric cut out with the lift. And so he hand operated this cage-like affair to down within a few feet of the ground floor.
And just then the light shot out. So I didn't wait for any more. I grabbed the girl by the hand and we took off down these stairs. But I still didn't think there'd be any danger of life or anything. But I wanted to get on the ground floor so that I could walk out if I had to.
The footpaths, well, every vantage point and every building, people lined with people and people looking out windows and that sort of thing and pointing and so on. And at that time, of course, the smoke was enormous, you know, just crowds and crowds of smoke erupting, but we stopped there and watched everything.
But I still went ahead, made my purchases, then realised that I couldn't get back through the fire door and decided I would go up the grand staircase and get into my workroom around the back way. Something that's quite forbidden is to ever go up the grand stairway. And that was where I met Miss Jenkins and the rest of the girls from the workroom who were making their way down.
We walked through a workroom, I think it might have been the tailoring, and we opened the door. And all that we could see there, I can still see it, was flames, immediately. And somebody come up and said, you can't go through. We said, we've got to go through. We haven't got anything from the office, had no handbag, no nothing. They said, you can't. So they turned us around and put us through, and we went down by the private stairway.
There was one girl who was quite hysterical. She'd been burnt out of the home 3 weeks before, and she was transfixed. She didn't want to let go of the balustrade because, unbeknown to me, I couldn't see the flames behind me. I was going up the stairway. They were coming down.
And I was literally open-mouthed. I couldn't believe anything could go so quickly. And then the heat started cracking the windows in beats.
There was the girls leaning out the window looking around to see where the fire was. And all of a sudden there was this big cloud of black smoke sort of came out over their heads through the windows. They all sort of dropped back, just like puppets. And it seemed to me they're looking out to see where the fire was, not realising, of course, it was right underneath them. And that sort of crept up on them very quickly, unawares. I don't think they were aware it was, because the way they were looking out and they were calling out and just talking, were as excited as people do at fire. And then, of course, it fall over so quickly when they disappeared. 1 minute they're there, and a second later they weren't. It wasn't until the floor collapsed that they realised, and then, of course, it was so quick, there was a sudden scream from all of them. They all screamed at once, and then dead silence. It just cut off as the flames, obviously. And that was the hardest part to sort of think of, to see them sort of disappear, going into, realise where they were going.
4 o'clock, the Siege Brigade call. Turned out St Albans, Sydenham, New Brighton, Sumner, Islington, Belfast and Wolston.
Was the thing I remember. As I walked up Colombo Street, I could feel the heat on my back. And when I got to Cathedral Square, the leaves on the trees were being blown with the heat.
And Mr. Heaton, who was a public works architect and who witnessed the fire and made various observations at the time, put together a proposed scenario for the fire spread, which seemed, in hindsight, to be fairly accurate. And it appears that the fire spread from the basement of Congreve up that unenclosed stairwell, through the ground floor of Congreve and up into the first floor. And from there, once it got through that Pinex covering that large opening on the first floor of Congreve's building, it was able to explode across the complex with terrifying speed. It wasn't an explosion in terms of the walls blowing out, like you would have with a bomb going off, but it was almost, people describe it as being like there being petrol vapour right throughout the building, someone lighting a match. That sort of an explosion. It's just a woof, and this fire came through like a fireball, and it was just moving ahead of it, trying to keep ahead of it. And of course the fire brigade then were trying to react to something that 1 minute they deemed it to be a fire confined to the basement, and the next minute they had a fire moving at terrifying speed through a complex which occupied an acre in the central city. But most people on the first floor were able to react ahead of it as the fire came through. And of course immediately this put people on the floors above that in danger. Their means of escape was threatened straight away. This fire had exploded with enormous proportions through the floors underneath them. And bearing in mind that the Ballantynes buildings had wooden floors, it was only going to be a matter of time before the very floors they were standing on were on fire and flames were coming through the floors.
Nancy Nash, Your Honour, from the Credit Office. Mr. Kenneth Ballantyne was in the room for 5 to 6 minutes while staff acting on instructions from Mr. Hudson were putting away records in the strong room.
I entered the credit office and within 10 or 15 seconds I told the girls to make their way down the tailoring stairs.
There is a serious discrepancy in the evidence here. Are we to believe that in an organisation that demanded unfailing obedience, 20 women heard an order from one of the film's directors and ignored it? What is known is that the records were put away and tightly stored in the strong room, a process that took 5 to 6 minutes. People had already died. The staff and the credit office were now in grave peril.
Nancy was one of the people who jumped out the window. Yeah. She has died. She's been dead for 6 years now. Yeah. And she said to me that she thought she could see the firemen down there and she could see the ladders, but not knowing that they were not nearly long enough. And she still thought they were going to be saved, and she kept going back to what we called the pipe. When any dockets were sent through, were you growing up when all those pipes went through those old trucks? Well, they were all huddled around that pipe, and she crossed the floor several times and asked them to come with her and look out the window with her. And she said the more she went over, they would just shake their heads and you know, overcome by smoke and just couldn't.
And the crowd would say, come on, come on, come on, egging them on. But they went back.
The flames were coming out through the floorboard. So she said, and then I thought, I've got to jump. And she was frightened to jump because she thought she'd get tangled up in the wires and she thought they were live. So, and then she said, if I throw down my handbag and it doesn't hit the wires, I'll jump. So that's what she did do. And because they saved her once she got onto the floor, the roof of the building.
They just couldn't believe it. You know, the cries of dismay, and especially the third one who jumped very, very shortly after. You know, it was just disbelief. Nobody could really comprehend what was going on.
The mate was going to another hose, I was going across to this one, and there was this thud. I can still see this girl today. She sort of dropped in front of me, and no more than 3-4 feet away. And obviously she'd jumped and she'd missed the veranda, or hit the veranda and bounced off into the street.
Apparently she jumped and hit the veranda and landed on the ground. And third officer Jim Burrows, I saw him take his tuning off and lay it over the body, you know. Tommy Dobson, he tried to get an Ajax ladder up on the roof for the Ballantynes to get one of the girls down. But the shape of the roof, V-shaped, or rounded shape, you couldn't get the ladder to, you know, against the building properly, and then the ladder caught fire.
A man appeared who was Kenneth Ballantyne, and he was right up on the top, framed in the window. He'd smashed the window and stood on the ledge. So the firemen saw him, and they played the fire hose on him. So they attempted to get a ladder up to him. Well, the ladder wouldn't reach. So they got another ladder alongside to get up, and that wouldn't reach, and they put another one up. Oh, it was a series of, you know, absolute bloody chaos.
With the store engulfed in flames, Kenneth Ballantyne, managing director, is the last person out of the building alive.
Shambles from the fire brigade here. The people in charge of that, nobody seemed to know what was going on. You know, there was no supervision or discipline.
But I can relate to how Jim Burrows must have thought. And although he came in for incredible criticism at the Royal Commission, I think many of the decisions he made were the right ones. He committed half his resource to finding and attacking the fire and held the rest back in reserve while he went to try and find other ways of getting at that fire. And it's very easy to make firemen look busy. Instead of having a crew of firemen lined up along the side of that fire engine, looking very smart, it would have been very easy to get them to run hoses in all directions and look like something was happening. But unless you can get those hose lines into the areas where they're going to attack that fire and stop it from spreading, the result would have been just the same.
Two hours after the first sighting of smoke, firemen surround the fire and contain it. Clearly, the authorities are already aware that people have died. For others, the terrible facts are only beginning to unfold.
I had just left Ballantynes to take up this new position. And it was only a matter of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, that I had no friends at all.
firefighting skills, volunteers from all over the district assisted in controlling the fire, which, at its height, required every appliance in the region.
Went through the cordon and got up as far as about Litchfield Street, and they had the fire under control. There were still police on duty, and one of the policemen stopped me and asked me, what I was doing. I told him who I was, and I told him that my father worked at Ballantynes, and he told me to go down to the barracks that night.
Scattered by the haphazard evacuation, staff were recalled in the early evening to nearby King Edward Barracks to call the roll.
So we went to the King Edward Barracks, great big barren edifice, really, and just by mutual consent, we seemed to gather in groups, whether it's a department, and we all seemed to gather there to see who was there, who wasn't there, listen to stories of what might have happened to someone.
Obviously, some people knew how bad fire had been with regards to loss of life. Other people, like myself, didn't know, and then you heard sort of rumours that there'd been people screaming inside the building when the fire was on, and people had jumped out and got killed, and others had jumped out and been injured. When I got there, I saw one of the Ballantynes management staff, told him who I was, and that I'd been told to come up there, and there was a policeman there with him. And it was then that he spoke to somebody and pointed at me and said, that's Alec Brown's son, and said a few other words, and that's when I knew that Dad was dead.
They put all the departments, each department had to get together, and it was then that I realised that most of the credit office were not there. And it was very sad that night too, because there was a dear old man. I suppose he wasn't old, but I thought he was old at that time. And he had lost his wife, and his daughter lived with him. And he was coming around asking us, had we seen his little girl? And I can always remember that too.
So anyway, they took us in, and there was Mrs. Early. She was executive staff. And she said, thank goodness I've seen you two. And then come along Wally. Oh, he said, thank goodness to see you. And we said, where are the others? We didn't know.
In the light of the new day, a stunned city begins to come to terms with the scale of the disaster.
We went back to work. Not then, Tina went back, I think, the next day.
I somehow didn't want to have anything more to do with that part. I was just too sad at that stage. So I went to the deluxe skating rink, and I just skated and skated and skated, and shock. I don't know, just was shock, was cold, was fear. That's how I coped that day.
The thing that struck me there was the whole crisis was in a complete state of shock. Just people just wandering around, really shocked. I don't think a lot of them could really comprehend what has happened.
Everyone in Canterbury was devastated. They all knew someone, or knew of someone, or somebody who was on the staff, and it just affected the whole of Canterbury. It was an absolute disaster. There's no other way to describe it.
I went out with Station Officer Hughes, and I think my brother Jack was with me too, and there was another couple of firemen, and we, I don't know what floor it was, whether it was the first or second floor. I know when we got up there, part of the floor was still there. It hadn't, so that part of the building was Well, it was burnt, but the flooring was, part of the flooring was there. Because when we went to walk across it, she was sagging, you know. Carpet was, you know, saturated carpet on it. I always remember that. Anyway, I got on my hands and knees and crawled across it. Anyway, they got this big, strong, it was a big, strong room like a safe. It was, that's what you're talking about. You know, practically nearly up to the ceiling, you know, with two big double doors in it. Anyway, I got them open. I thought that some of the girls might have shelved themselves in there, but there was no one in there. But the papers in there were intact.
Many people witnessed the fire and saw a fire of huge proportions with people screaming and firemen running in all directions. But the critical part of the whole thing and where the actual Commission of Inquiry spent most of its time working was in the initial stages of the fire, when it was forming itself, when it was spreading like an insidious cancer throughout the whole complex, and the important three buildings that we talked about earlier, namely Congreves, Goodman's and Pratt's. That's the area where all the lives were lost, and that's the area where the fire brigade were trying to contain the fire initially. And that's the most important thing to understand about the whole of the Ballantynes tragedy. That's where the whole thing took place.
And the fire brigade got hell afterwards. You know, after they go out on an engine, you get people on the sideline saying, "What about Ballantynes?" And, you know, and giving you all the hard heckle, you know. You're going past it for a long time. You know, they sort of blamed us, but it wasn't our fault.
It must have been going a wee while, and I sort of feel if they'd only got the staff out sooner, even if, you know, the fire didn't amount to much, but I don't know when it started or anything else, but I just feel that, well, if you're in a fire in your own home and the smoke alarm went off, you'd be out, wouldn't you? And I sort of feel perhaps if they'd have, because you wouldn't wait to save anything, you'd just go.
This big complex we've discussed had no alarm bells in it whatsoever. It had no fire detection system. There was no practice evacuation scheme. And the management didn't evacuate the building, and neither did the fire brigade. And it occurs to me that if the fire brigade had devoted all their efforts initially to evacuating the building, turns out they had 10 minutes when we look at the timescale of things today, from the time they got there until the flashover occurred. Whether they would have been able to evacuate the building with the resources they had on site in that 10 minutes, was highly questionable, I believe.
My brother Jack and myself, we had the job of scrubbing the tarpaulins they took the bodies out on, you know. And that was a hell of a job because we used to have these hard bristle brooms, you know, and you spread the tarpaulin out. We'd couple up the hose and we had to hose down these tarpaulins and scrub them with the hard brooms. And it was just bits of hanks of hair and flesh and bits of bone and all that type of stuff, you know. Had to wash them all off and clean them up. That was a bit of not a very good time.
Your Honour, my name is John Bainbridge Kearton, and I am a Sergeant of Police and official police photographer stationed at Christchurch. On the morning of the 19th of November 1947, I commenced duty at the Christchurch Public Hospital mortuary, and I remained in charge of the mortuary until the 22nd of November 1947. When I took over, there were the charred remains of 28 bodies which have been removed from the Ballantynes building to the mortuary by the police. Between that time and the 22nd of November, the charred remains of 12 further bodies from the Ballantynes building were brought to the mortuary by the police. Not one of these bodies was in an identifiable condition, and in consequence, I numbered each of them, and on the morning of the 22nd of November 1947, I saw each body placed in a separate casket, numbered according to the body number.
Ballantynes Traffic Department and as the secretary to the Chief Traffic Inspector. And part of my duties was an enormous task, was to set up the route to where the funeral was going to take place, and all the cars that had to be found, and we had to draw plans, and everybody's name had to be put on these plans. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, to plan the route of my friends to departure.
On the solemn occasion of the civic funeral of those who died in Ballantynes Fire, all Christchurch mourned. Great crowds lined the streets, and the city was hushed as the long procession passed, carrying the 41 dead to their final resting place. At Ruru Lawn Cemetery, 10,000 people gathered for the ceremony at the graveside, and to their grief was added the thoughts and sadness of the nation.
Years on, standard roses grow above the graves of 41 people, the victims of the Ballantynes fire. 22 of those victims were under 25. 31 were women. 3 men lost their wives. 6 women lost their husbands. 3 of the victims left children behind. One family lost a son and daughter. Another lost a father and a son. And that son left behind a wife and 2 children. 65 days and 4.5